Okay guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about how you can detrain, maintain and or gain during this lockdown period, and if you are having any extended time away from the gym. So before we go any further guys, if you haven't already, it would be a huge help to me if you could just click the subscribe button below and that little bell thing. It'll notify you whenever we put any videos up, and ultimately you'll be able to spread the message of strength to those who need it. Now the main focus of today, we talk about how we can prevent detraining from taking place, maintain your gains and possibly improve them during this lockdown period, or like I said, if you're having any extended time away from the gym. Typically when I do these videos I tend to talk about the science first and the application second. However, this time I'm going to flip it on its head. I'm going to talk about exactly what you need to do straight away, and then if you want to stick around and we can talk about the science at the end, then you're more than welcome to. The first port of call, it's not even written on the board behind me because I can't even believe I have to say this, just train. The number one way to prevent detraining from taking place and to maintain your gains is to train. It's really not that difficult. I'm having to have this discussion with several people that I'm not going to train because I don't have access to a gym is the same way as saying, you know, I would learn how to drive but my first car ain't going to be an Audi. It's ridiculous. You're still going to train, okay? If you've got bodyweight exercises, yeah, it's not as good as having a full Alico set, but it's still better than nothing. It's still going to maintain your gains, okay? It's still going to benefit you in one way or another. If you turn around and say, oh, I can't be arsed training now, I've only got, you know, my body weight. And what if you were to never have access to a gym again? Does that mean you're just going to become fat and just do nothing? No. You need to continue to train, okay? Whether it's bodyweight exercises, all these people all over the internet that are slamming bodyweight exercises saying, mate, you're not going to build any muscle. Doesn't matter. That's not the goal. What you will do is be in a better shape than you were if you just completely scrapped it all together and said, you know what, because I don't have access to, it's a typical millennial thing we have where we say, oh, well, because I don't have access to complete awesome equipment, I'm just not going to do it. It's spoiled, okay? It's that simple. You just need to get your ass into a training session and actually do something. Protein, okay? Muscle is respondent to two primary anabolic stimulus, okay? It's responsible to mechanical tension and it's responsible to the ingestion of leucine. If you have a high amount of leucine within your diet, you get that muscle protein synthesis response. But no, people are trying to complete Netflix or waiting for the gyms to open again, and ultimately they're going to experience a larger detraining effect than if they would just simply focus on their diet and make sure they're getting enough protein. Now, rant over. We're talking about training. How can we optimize it? What can we include to make sure that you get the most out of it? Step number one, isometric work, okay? I've already written an article on this. I'll include it in the link below, and you can also download the article as a small mini ebook. But ultimately, isometric training is performing or exerting force against an immovable object or holding a static position. They're technically two different types. You need minimal equipment. All you need to do is find something that won't move and push against it. It is ultimately one of the best ways to improve your strength anyway, even if you did have access to all this equipment, okay? I strongly advocate for people to include isometric training within their protocol, whether they have access to an Alico kit or not. Simply put, you can use a towel and you can get a pretty decent isometric workout throughout the course of your entire training session. So even people that are lacking with things like resistance bands, provided that you're creative enough, provided that you know how to implement isometric training, which you'll see on that article if you click it below, you'll be able to get a decent benefit and decent training effect that will actually improve your strength when you come to return to the gym. Next step is occlusion training. Now, you may or may not be familiar with this. It's also known as blood flow restriction training, and it's basically where we restrict the blood flow return from a muscle that is currently being put under metabolic stress. We place this cuff, okay, around the proximal part of the humerus, or in other words the upper arm. We can also use it on the leg as well, so we can attach it around the upper part of the thigh, restrict the return of the blood flow and perform an exercise that initiates a decent amount of metabolic fatigue. This has been shown extensively within research to increase the amount of metabolic stress significantly in comparison to a non-occluded alternative. And that ultimately, we know that metabolic stress elicits a decent amount of hypertrophy, so it's always something worth including. You can do it literally bodyweight. If you occlude it and hold a bottle of water, do 30 seconds to a minute, rest, keep the band on, 30 seconds to a minute, go again, 3 sets of that, and you'll have a pump that's equivalent to when you're smashing out curls within the squat rack. Now, just as a disclaimer for the occlusion training, if you have any blood pressure issues, any circulatory issues, please consult with your doctor before performing that type of training. Next one, time and attention. Okay, I see a lot of people doing metabolic based activities and, you know, moving up and down and trying to get the heart going. That's great, but it doesn't necessarily have the same carryover to strength. When we're looking at trying to maintain or gain, increase the amount of time and attention that you spend within a given movement. Whether it's lowering, lifting or holding phase, as we said earlier with isometric training, make sure that you keep the muscle under tension, slow the movement right down, and you'll see that it is a lot harder than it looks. And then finally, stability and skill. Within the stability component, there's a couple of different things you can do. You can can perform unilateral versions of an exercise. So a single arm press up is a damn sight harder than a bilateral press up. A split squat, okay, pistol squats, that type of thing. You can work on drilling your stability and also get different activation patterns that ultimately carry over to bilateral movements, say you're a powerlifter or a weightlifter or so on. Carrying on from that, a lot of the time I see people that say that they're very strong and then you ask them to stand on one leg and they fall all over the place. It's absolutely ridiculous. Improve your stability now and it'll carry over quite well to when you go back into the gym. When it comes to stability, you can also use offset loading. So say you only have one kettlebell, doing a split squat with the weight on the opposite side to the leg that you're squatting on is going to be a damn sight harder than holding it at your chest. It reinforces stability, it loads the body in a different plane of motion, and it ultimately carries over to being a stronger person. And finally, skill work. We know that strength is a multifaceted component. It's neurological and psychological in nature, which means there's a big coordination aspect included. Even if you have a broom handle, okay, again, it goes back to that mindset of, yeah, it's not ideal, but we don't get to decide that a lot of the time. So you can utilize an empty bar and still carry over to your performance because you have a better recognition of what constitutes good technique, what constitutes bad technique, and so on. So guys, there are these tips to detraining, maintaining, and gaining during extended periods away from the gym. Just to summarize and remind you, train, for crying out loud, it's not that difficult. Make sure that you're getting enough protein and make sure that you're keeping that anabolic stimulus high. Isometric training is right up there as one of the best training protocols anyway. Occlusion training, again, make sure that you get medical clearance before you do that if you have any circulation issues. Time under tension, stability work, and improve your skills. Now, when it comes to the science of detraining, it's time to get a little bit nerdy and a little bit deep. One of the things I want to make people aware of is the pre-existing knowledge surrounding detraining is often flawed because of where it came from. The initial research base that people tend to draw their conclusions from was primarily centered around two population cohorts. Number one was military personnel that were involved in accidents that resulted in them being bedbound, and then number two was astronauts, okay, so studies of spaceflight and so on. So whenever you hear those studies about, oh, well, you can lose 30% of your strength, within under a week, that's typically when you have people that are completely inactive, not only inactive, but they're in a scenario where their body is trying to recover from a stimulus that they are not used to being exposed to. So for example, people that go through simulated spaceflight, the body isn't used to being unloaded in that way, so it responds in quite a negative way. But if you're walking upstairs, okay, and you're hiking or you're simply moving around day to day, your body has a much better job of retaining those gains. We also have the notion again of psychological influence of strength. We know that psychology, it plays a huge role. So if you've got that perception that you are able to be strong, it will stay with you. When it goes back to returning to the gym, I'm not saying that you should slap on the same weight that you did. That would be lunacy, obviously, but be aware that there is still some carryover there. You're not gonna all of a sudden forget how to deadlift, are you? Now, another thing that I want to make people aware of is, provided that you were a consistent trainee before the lockdown or the extended period away from the gym, okay, provided that you trained on a relatively consistent basis, you need to be aware of what's known as your anabolic baseline, or at least your strength baseline. Effectively, when you start as a trainee, okay, your body is reluctant to change. Its baseline, its homeostatic regulation, so to speak, is to be a pretty pitiful, weak individual if that's where you came from. However, over time, as you build that strength up, and provided it takes place over a longer course of time, your body starts to see that as its new baseline. This is the reason why some people can have 6 months to a year out of training, not really caring, just dossing around a little bit, be able to pick up 80% of what their max used to be. I always use the 80-20 rule when trying to explain a lot of these principles, and it's no different in this scenario. If you see that we are trying to focus on improving your 80% whenever we are training, not just your 100%, you'll start to understand that a lot of these mechanisms turn towards this being the new version of who you are. So if you have a decent amount of muscle mass, okay, your body isn't just going to drop it all of a sudden, provided that you maintain a decent amount of activity and that protein regulation. Unless you're up at the 100% end of your spectrum, so for example, you're an elite powerlifter and elite athlete, then obviously that top 20% is going to drop. But again, your 80% is still higher than what most of the population have, and it's still going to be higher than what it would have been had you never trained before. And then finally, one of the things that I want to talk about is muscle memory. Now, it's something that we're all familiar with, and we typically see it from a neurological standpoint. So we typically see that the nerves and all this geeky little electricity stuff that innervate the muscle, they are retained during a period of inactivity, and it does actually take place. So the neurological aspects of it, we see that when you get stronger within a movement, okay, you get an increased what's known as motor unit innervation. So the plugs that go into the muscle, the alpha motor neurons that plug into the muscle, they increase, okay, and you get this kind of stronger synaptic link to the muscle, which means you can contract it harder. Within that scenario, when you cease training, okay, your body does a very good job of keeping that there. It might reduce slightly again, like we said with the other mechanisms, but it doesn't necessarily go all the way, which means you can go back and your body can remember what took place. But we've also found with the newer research that on a hypertrophic level, certain histological changes, so changes that occur on a cellular level, actually are retained as well. So something known as myonuclei. When we perform resistance training over an extended period of time, particularly to elicit hypertrophy or to elicit a muscle building response, you get something known as myonuclear accretion. This is a factor that influences the remodeling response of muscle in response to mechanical tension. And we've seen within some of the studies, when you go through a period of detraining, that myonuclear number doesn't return to baseline, it actually stays.
You simply lose myonuclei.
Which means if you've had a year within the gym, okay, and you've been working really, really hard, and then you have to have a year out, you're not back to where you were to start with, because your body's retained some of those histological and neurological changes. We're really within adverse conditions where we start to see that those gains actually get lost at a rapid rate. So bed rest, zero gravity scenarios, or in a scenario where your body experiences a significant disease that ultimately results in muscular dystrophy or muscular atrophy. If you're just stuck at home and you don't necessarily have access to your Rogue or Eleiko equipment, that's not the end of the world. You can still train, you can still maintain, and you can still gain within this cycle. Might not be optimal, but you can still crack on. And then one final bonus thing I want to say when it comes to the application for your training, number 7 is increase your frequency. If you don't have access to the same amount of training equipment and or you can't elicit the same amount of overload, it means you can train more frequently. So instead of doing your 3-day-a-week split where you do chest, try, back, by, leg, shoulders, train every single day. It will again provide overload in a different way that your body's not used to, and it will have a better carryover. You'll have an improved work capacity. You'll be all around a better athlete when it comes back to going into the gym, and you've used this time wisely. So as always guys, if you like the video, please leave a like below, and it would be a huge help, as I said, if you could click the subscribe button and that little ding 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 bell. It'll allow me to spread the information to you guys to make sure that you are getting stronger safely and effectively. As always, stay strong and stay tuned for the next one.